So we didn't miss anything good, just me talking. But I'm going to turn this over to Cersei and Charlie and Lindell and let them take it from here. I'll just ask everybody else to mute yourselves if you can. If you have questions, you can put them in the chat. And I think Cersei has some opportunities for kind of folks to be interactive. And I'll let her explain that. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to chat me too.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us tonight. I'm going to be working off of a PDF, which I think has been sent to all of you, but you don't really need to have it open if you don't want to. It does have some links to follow up on some of the information I'm going to present. And I'm going to share my screen now so you can see my copy of it.
Let me make sure you've got share. There you go.
All right. So you see my mouse moving there. Okay, good. All right. So I want to say first and foremost that we are not experts in social services or psychologists, but we've had a lot of experience, both as being transgender ourselves or being involved in advocacy for transgender people. That's the information we want to bring to you tonight. I was awarded the state for 5 years, starting at age 13, so I know what it's like to be in the foster care system and be transgender at the same time. That was a long time ago. And some of the things that happened to me back then would be illegal today, but anyway, we don't need to go into that. So first thing I want to talk about is something many of you may have seen before. It's a useful graphic because it helps distinguish some of the differences in perceptions about transgender people. I'm going to just touch on each of these and then ask you to give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you know this already. So we don't need to stay on this too long if you already understand. So let's start first talking about the difference between gender identity and sexual orientation. Does everybody understand the difference with that? Thumbs up if you do. You can do it, like you can do it with your thumb, or you can hit the, I'm sorry, what is the button again? Sorry, Kate.
You can use the reactions button down okay. At the bottom of your screen. That may be hard to find with the screen sharing on, so you can just do the physical thumbs up.
So do we have any people who need more of an explanation there?
Looks like we're pretty good.
Okay, good. Okay, so then I will ask you before I move off the slide, is there anything here that you would like me to elaborate on? Did you get any reaction with that? I need to expand this out a little bit.
I don't see any questions coming through on the chat.
Okay, great. We can come back to this if you think of something later. Okay, so here's some statistics about LGBTQ children. You may have seen some of this already, and you may have seen this in your work. So about 30% of foster kids are LGBTQ for various reasons. A lot of it is family rejection. Most of it is actually. About 20 to 40% of homeless youth are LGBTQ, and African American and Native American youth are disproportionately represented in that. Federal surveys show that about 2% of US high school students identify as transgender. That one's a bit of a hard one to pin down because transgender is actually a pretty big umbrella. Basically, it means you identify with the gender other than what you were assigned at birth. That is not necessarily in the binary, so male, female, non-binary, agender. There's basically something that they did not put on your birth certificate. And some transgender kids are interested in medically transitioning, some are not. Some may just be unwilling to play the roles handed to them by society and are opting out in that way. And some have a very burning desire to be physically the gender that they identify with. And some will experience gender dysphoria, some will not. Some will not experience it until they begin to think about it, or they weren't aware that it was there. They just felt off somewhere. Okay, so transgender students are bullied at a much higher rate, about 35% versus 15 to 21% for cisgender students. Anybody not know what cisgender means? Emily, you're muted, but that's okay. I'll just go into it. Okay, it's just a convenient term to use. It's easy. It's less of a mouthful than saying people who are not transgender. It's trans is I think it's the Latin root for that is to cross over, and cis is same side. So that's all it means. You may have heard from some people that it's a slur. It is not. Never was. It is simply a convenient way to talk about people who are not transgender. So half of all transgender people have been sexually assaulted, sometimes by their own families, and sometimes that's why they're on the streets. Transgender teens with restricted bathroom access are at higher risk of sexual assault. If you can imagine presenting female being forced to go into the boys' bathroom, you can see the danger there. Rates of detransition or retransition. This is a very disputed area, and it's unfortunately used often by some politicians and religious leaders to argue against any kind of treatment for trans kids. Often they will say, well, they should wait till they're 18 and they're adults, and they completely gloss over the fact that many trans teens are desperate to change. Often puberty is when gender dysphoria hits very hard. And to make them wait 5 years and have their body go through the completely wrong puberty and then have to correct that with surgeries or electrolysis, it's pretty cruel. So most of this.
Can I interrupt you for 1 second? This is
Sure.
Kate. I think I know what detransition means using context clues, but can you explain? And also there's a request in the chat to just, for some of these, rather than asking whether folks know the term, to just explain it. I think folks are really eager to make sure they have the correct understanding and they're here to learn. So just dive right into telling us everything.
Okay, I will do that.
Thank you.
I will give you an example from my own life. I was raised as a girl, more or less, until I was about 4 years old. And that because I was insisting on not wearing boys' clothes. And then I had to, then they forced me to pretend to be a boy. So when I got out on my own, I started transitioning. But I was also part of a fundamental Christian church at the time. And there was that. And also I fell in love with someone who told me that they couldn't stay with me if I transitioned. So I detransitioned. What that meant is that I stopped hormones. I started presenting as male. And I had a teacher, I won't say a therapist, more of a spiritual teacher at the time, that told me that if I continued doing that long enough, those feelings would go away. He was dead wrong. But that's what it means. You stop all transition related things. You go back to your birth, assigned gender, and it's a miserable way to live. So it's often what people do is they will detransition and then later they just can't stand it anymore and they retransition again, which is what I did. It's fairly rare. The arguments against trans treatments tries to paint a picture of many kids later in life regretting what they have done and detransitioning because of that. And almost all the studies that have ever been done show that that is not true. The detransition rates are under 2%, especially if someone who's gone as far as medical transition. Transitioning is very successful. It's really saves lives. It makes people happier. There's a better outcome. And you can read about this on almost any major medical or psychiatric website. I'll give you lots of links here. So the other thing that is that affects people's mental health is affirming care. Someone can start transition, but if their family is dead against them, they've kicked them out, they don't have access to medical help, that can be another factor in causing somebody to detransition. So Charlie, Lindell, is there anything you'd like to talk about with that? Okay, your sound's off, but I saw you shaking your head. Okay, so desistance is not the same as detransition. If you look at the WPATH, I'm not going to get this right, I know. It is a worldwide organization that studies transgender care and is based on hospital and medical studies. It's kind of the gold standard for that most psychologists and most practitioners use. Children never medically transition. You hear about this often in the news, in the media, where they say it's child abuse because you're surgically altering a child. Nobody does that. The only thing that does happen is at about age 12 or 13, if they have been properly evaluated and they have persisted in their transgender identity, they will be given puberty blockers so that they put the pause button on, give the child time to think about it. So every effort is made to not start transitioning until all indicators show that they're absolutely going to transition and that they'll be happy doing that. So desistance means that a child who is perhaps expressing themselves as a different gender or in an atypical way grows out of it. And this is more prevalent with children than it is with teens. Usually after puberty, around that time, if a teen still feels that way and is pretty unshakable in their conviction, that's a pretty good sign that it's not going to change for them. Let's see, and now unfortunately, there is this thing out there called rapid onset gender dysphoria. This was proposed by a researcher, and it was actually published in unfortunately, it was published in a respected, let's see if I can get this over here.
See, while you're looking for that, we have a question that came through in the chat. Is it okay if I?
No, please.
Pause. So there's a question that said, I'd heard that hormonal transitioning can typically be reversed. Is this correct?
Depends how far it goes. For instance, if for someone who's transitioning to female, they could have, if the breast growth gets to a certain point, that won't go away. If someone's transitioning to male, if they have facial hair and so forth, that's not going to go away. So it depends on how long, but there is a period of time where you can reverse without really much in the way of changes. Charlie, about how long does it take for trans guys to start to develop facial hair?
I think a lot of that depends on their genetic makeup. I can just say for myself, I saw changes at about the 7th month. And actually now, I mean, next Monday is my 10th year of transitioning. And so just in the last year, and I say because of COVID, I was able to keep a beard, I'll keep a mask on. I didn't have to shave every day, that I'm growing more full beard. So I think you see it, and about the 8th month, you start seeing changes, and then it continues probably well into your 5th or 6th year.
It's a similar timeline for trans females. The breast growth usually takes a long time to come in. It's frustrating for a lot of people. They want to see changes right away, but it's your second puberty, and the first one took a long time too.
Circe, a question occurred to me while you were talking about the puberty blockers, because a lot of the volunteers and folks on the line will be maybe working with young children, young folks who are looking at that decision, and their decision. But I think I was just wondering about kind of what they should, how they maybe could encourage, what they should encourage that young person to do as they think through that decision. Does that, could they encourage them to talk to their doctor? Or their, I mean, how should they kind of broach that?
Anyone who has a child come out to them, and in our PFLAG group, we've seen this many times. Parents are sometimes quite shocked. Sometimes, they had no clue. Sometimes they did, but so the first thing you do is you go to a gender identity specialist, and that's very important. We had somebody recent. It sounds like I'm veering off somebody, but I'll get to it. We had somebody recently that came in and went to their pediatrician, and the pediatrician said, okay, well, we'll put you on birth control so you won't have periods. Okay, that's possibly helpful, but at puberty, typically a trans person is desperate. I mean, they're just adamant that they need to stop this train from going any further. So if the child is prepubescent, often they just say, we'll let the child express themselves the way they want. There is no medical intervention necessary until they begin puberty. So there's absolutely no harm, and it's totally reversible, obviously, because you're not changing anything. So a child can express themselves the way they want, and they can live that way full time. And the hardest thing, I think, for parents who may have had pictures in their head of their child growing up to be this man or woman is letting that go and letting things change. And if you think about it, this is a process that not only involves gender development, there are many ways that our children tend to go in different directions than we thought they were going to, and we have to adjust. This just happens to be a fairly big one. So prior to puberty, just let them express themselves the way they want. Let them have fun. Let them enjoy themselves. And if they may at some point decide, yeah, well, I don't really want to do this. Although I don't know what the rates are on that, but desistance in that case is usually much higher than detransition later on. Once they reach puberty, you may have heard that puberty blockers are dangerous. There are a lot of studies showing they are not. They've been used for a long time, not just for trans kids. They use it for girls cis girls who go into puberty too early to slow it down. So it's a known treatment that's been around for a very long time. And once you stop it, puberty resumes. So if at some point the child decides, starts to feel that that's not them anymore. I'm using terms like child decides. I'm not meaning it in that case. I mean, I know the parents are part of this, but as a parent, you can pay attention to your kids' behaviors and needs over a period of time. And if they are consistent and persistent, I forget the third one, Lindell, what was that? Persistent, consistent, insistent, that's it. These are the three things you look for in a child to find out, to sort of gauge whether this is something that's temporary or not going away. I don't know, did that answer your question?
I think that was really helpful. Thank you. I was just thinking, about our volunteers or the folks on the line who are working with young people who came to them for advice or guidance. And I think that's helpful. But if other folks have questions, feel free to. Lindell, it looks like you wanted to ask.
Yeah, I just wanted to really emphasize what Circe was saying about going to a gender specialist, because that's the recommendation I would make to any parent or family who is looking at this situation. And I think the other thing is to just not panic, right? To just realize that this is something that there are people out there who know what is going on and how to help. But you want to make sure that you get to the right person, because frankly, there are pediatricians who don't know anything about this at all, and may not give good advice or may not have good advice. So going to someone who is an expert in this is a really, really good first step. And again, just being supportive from the outset, maybe not knowing what you're going to do, but reassuring the child that you're listening to them.
And it wouldn't hurt for you to get some support yourself. As a parent faced with something like that, you can feel like you're on a roller coaster. There can be this sense of loss, the sense of mourning, almost like you feel like you've lost something there. And we've seen that many times in our support group. I want to tell you something that happened. I have a friend who's a family counselor who asked me to go out to dinner with her so that she could talk about a case she was working on. And some parents came to her to talk about their assigned female at birth child. I'll have to ask if everybody knows why we say that, assigned, but anyway. This child was assigned female at birth and wanted to transition, and the therapist said that this was such a shame because she was such a beautiful girl, and I'm almost face planting there listening to this. It's like, you can't do that. You can't tell people, parents, because of the way they look on the outside, that this is a shame and it's too bad this is happening, because they're going through so much already, and sometimes they're grasping at straws, trying to find a way out of this, hoping that this is not going to happen. And yeah, anyway, it was an interesting dinner after that. So that term I used, would anyone like some background on why we say assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth? Okay.
I think that
This
would be
makes-
helpful, Cersei, if you could describe.
Yeah. So it sounds like a strange thing to say. You're born, they look at your genitals, they put in MRF, right? Except in about 1 in every 2,000 births, they can't tell. There are intersex people around. There are varying degrees of intersex conditions. Sometimes they're obvious, sometimes they're not. Sometimes people find out much later in life. So the doctor really is assigning that. Sometimes the doctors will even go to the parents and say, well, what do you want me to turn the child into? This is what they used to do. And this is something that was done to me. Basically decided that I was more easily converted into being a boy than a girl. So they checked my parents and said, yep, and that's what they assigned to me. This is something they're not doing so much anymore, because they have found out that there is how can I put this? Our gender, there is an internal sense of gender. Stronger than some people, than other people. It's not just male or female, but it seems to be hardwired, like a personality trait, like being left-handed or having mathematical ability. And this is one of the things that convinced most of the major psychiatric organizations in this country and the World Health Organization to stop calling gender dysphoria or gender identity disorder, is what they used to call it. Stop calling it a mental illness. They no longer do that, because they recognize that some people are actually wired that way. It is not something you can cure with therapy. I tried to cure it with prayer. That didn't work either. When we say assigned male or assigned female, it's basically the stamp they put on your birth certificate. And if you grow up and you feel differently about it, you're transgender by definition. So, does that help? Okay. So this controversy, has anybody actually heard of this? I don't want to dwell on it too much. The rapid onset gender dysphoria controversy. It was it's a paper that was eventually withdrawn and rewritten, but the idea was that a researcher went around and talked to parents of trans kids who just come out to them and said, did you see this coming? And they said no. And so she wrote this whole long paper. Well, it's a social contagion. It's being brought about by the media and by social situations. And it's basically, she was making it seem like something that was totally in somebody's head and had no real basis in fact. And of course, most of the psychiatric and gender advocacy community really erupted over this, and it was withdrawn. So if you've heard about this, it isn't true. That's not the way it works. Okay, so sometimes we use the term gender nonconforming. It's interesting when, and that can mean a lot of different things. Like, I should digress a little bit. There are three aspects that you can think of when it comes to gender. Julie Serrano wrote a book about this and included this. There is the biology, which people assume is either male or female, and it's not. There are a sizable percentage of people who are intersex. And sometimes they don't know it. Sometimes it can be genetic. Sometimes it doesn't really show until later in life. So that part is, that is how you were born, but it is not necessarily one or the other. The second is gender presentation, how you dress, how you act, the choices you make in life as far as profession and so forth. And those are made up. Those are based on culture and time, and they can vary depending where you are in the world. They can vary by what time period you're from. They're really culturally determined. But the last one, she called it unconscious identity. And this is what I talked about earlier, that gender identity can be like a personality trait. And you're born with that. It's not something you can change. You can't alter it with therapy. If you fight it, you are risking depression and anxiety and really your emotional deadening. If you spend every day of your life telling a lie to the world and suppressing your feelings, after a while, you don't really feel much of anything at all. And I was in that place at one time. So one of the reasons that you hear this term called gender euphoria or euphoria, when someone starts to transition, it's such a release and such a weight is lifted off their shoulders. Charlie, do you want to talk about that a little bit, how it was for you?
Oh, sure. Thanks, Cersei. So I'll just get raw. At the age of 12, I made my first serious suicide attempt because I was bullied so badly in school, because I looked different, I act different, and I wanted to play with all boys. And so I was bullied to the point where I made a very first serious suicide attempt of eating a whole box of Miracle Grow plant food. And I got my stomach pumped. And then when I was in the ER, I can remember them telling my parents that I was too young to be put into a psych unit. Being born from, Bible thumping African-American parents who believed that Jesus Christ was the way and that I would be prayed for and I'd be better. They did not accept the suggestions from the doctors that I go seek therapy. And so I continued to do this until 17. And at 17, I made yet the next serious suicide attempt. And at that point now, I'm 12 years old and I'm drinking like I'm 30. And I would drink until I came into the rooms of AA at the age of 46. And at 17, I was put in David C. Wilson Hospital. And they called my parents in. They did a battery of tests and they told my parents. I remember sitting outside the doctor's office listening to them talk to my parents. And they said that I needed to have at least 6 to 8, possibly 12 weeks of ECT because I was confused as the gender that I was in. And so I had 9 to 10 weeks, I believe, of ECT at University of Virginia Hospital through David C. Wilson. And as you can tell, it didn't work. And so for another so many years, I pushed in this confusion about gender. I didn't see people who looked like me in Charlottesville. I didn't know where to go to find people that looked like me until I couldn't take it any longer. And then I was getting ready. I was 5 years sober, but I was still so miserable and angry and depressed that the only thing I could decide to do was buy a gun and kill myself. And I was determined to kill myself sober because I didn't want my AA community to think that I had because I stayed sober for a long time out of spite, but I didn't want my AA community, who was very dear to me, to think that I had slipped and drank and killed myself. along came Carter Brown, a Black trans man. And I tell this story because it is very important as people who are working with young adults and children that we recognize early the struggles that they have. You know, not only are as children are we struggling within ourselves, we're also struggling with the people who are against us. Bullying is much more real now than it was for me back in the 60s. I'm a huge advocate that a young child that's trying to transition needs mentors, they need help, as we have in AA sponsors. We need people that will help them, that will understand, that will hold their hand, and also the family. And lastly, I'll say, Cersei, I believe you were there maybe right before we closed down for the COVID with the PFLAG support groups. There was a young family that came in with a young child, young boy that was transitioning. They're a Hispanic family. They drove all the way from Manassas, Virginia, because they had no other place other than PFLAG or the Blue Ridge support group to go. And so they came maybe 3 times. And the first time the father was, you know, that typical macho guy. And he sat in the corner with his arms crossed, very angry, and said there was no way he was going to accept his daughter to be a son. But something that guy must have seen something that he needed to continue to love his child. And they came 3 more times. And then that last time, right before we shut down, that father addressed his child as his son. And so, you know, these are the things that we need. We need support groups. We need mentors. We need people to help. A power greater than myself kept me alive, got me sober, and got me doing what I'm doing today. But I think it's 10 times, 20 times worse out there now for kids. So thanks, Cersei, for letting me run my mouth a little more than I should.
No, that's great. That's great.
Charlie, I have a question for you, or Cersei or Lindell. You mentioned the support groups and how they were happening pre-COVID. How's that happening now?
Well, PFLAG just recently started doing hybrid meetings where anybody who feels unsafe attending in person can attend virtually, like we're doing. We have a room to use at the Women's Initiative with a large screen, and those that are vaccinated and feel safe enough to do that will meet there. We separate the chairs by 6 feet, and we all wear masks. So you can do either one, and that's worked out pretty well so far. There are other groups like the James River Transgender Society in Richmond, who just went all in-person meetings a few months back. I'm not so sure about that, especially with the new variant going around. So, but anyway, those meetings are available once a month. Our meetings. There are plenty of others, and if we'll get to that slide, but there are links I can give you that gives you more information, more places to go to look at where you can attend meetings virtually. And I think, Lindell, do you know if Side by Side is going to be offering meetings again? Or Side by Side is a youth group, 14 through 20, and they have a chapter here. They did have a chapter here in Charlottesville.
Sorry.
Sorry?
Sorry, I thought I would muted myself.
Okay.
So they've been talking about going, having in-person meetings again, and I'm actually going to look really quickly because I think they may have done that. Nope, they're still
So virtual.
Yeah, I'm going to put a link to their calendar. However, Side by Side is an excellent organization.
Yeah, and they meet much more often. There's one other thing I wanted to share before we get off the subject of gender dysphoria. Some people experience it right from the beginning. Some people don't experience it at all, but just feel more comfortable transitioning to a different gender. And some people sort of discover it like, oh, that's what I've been feeling all these years. So there's a range there. Personally, I had it very strong right from the beginning. In the mid-60s, there was a researcher into sexuality and identity at Johns Hopkins. His name was John Money, and a young couple came to him with their child. They had had twin sons, but one of them had his penis burned off in a circumcision accident. And so they came to him distraught, said, what do we do? And at the time, there was still a controversy as to whether gender identity was nature or nurture, although it was leaning towards nature. This researcher said, raise a child as a girl. We'll do a little surgery so that they look more female. We'll do more as they get older. When they reach the age of puberty, we will give them hormones they'll develop, which they did. And he went on to make his mark in the world on this case. He wrote paper after paper, talked about how successful it was, and it was very surprising to a lot of other people because the evidence had started to point in the direction. The trouble is he lied. It was not going well, and he covered it up. The child was angry and acting out and hated dressing up. This child did exactly what trans men do who are experiencing gender dysphoria. They basically turn this child into someone who's transgender by forcing them into a role for which they were not wired. And it's a tragic story because they eventually told the child immediately transitioned back to be a man, but later in life took his life. I'm offering that as further proof that we really do have some basic wiring inside of us that makes us the way we are. And there have been twin studies done. I think there's been at least 2 major ones where they find that twins who've been separated at birth and adopted by different families are very similar in personality. So they basically say you're about half of who you are is pre-wired, about half of who you are is what you decide to be. So, okay, so
Cersei, sorry to interrupt. We
Go
had a
ahead.
question, and maybe you covered this, but we had a question come through the chat about whether there's a kind of, if you can explain the difference between gender dysphoria and transgender, or are they one and the same? And if I missed the answer, I apologize. I'm manning the chat and everything else. I'm trying to keep it all straight.
Yeah, the basic definition of transgender means you identify as something besides the gender on your birth certificate. Gender dysphoria can hit you when you don't even know that, when you don't even know what your gender is. And in fact, many people report they had no words growing up, they didn't know. I didn't figure out that I was transgender until I was 13. I mean, I knew I was different. I knew I was unhappy. But I heard about Christine Jorgensen, and that changed my world. It's like, oh, that's what I am. So gender dysphoria comes from an innate sense of being a gender that the world tells you you're not. And all the frustration, anger, and hurt that goes along with that, and the longing that goes along with that. It's hard to describe to somebody who hasn't experienced it, but it's a little like being homesick for a place that you've never been. And not really understanding why you feel that way. But
thank you. That's really helpful.
Someone can be transgender and not experience deep gender dysphoria. Okay, recommended practices, and this is probably a little presumptive on our part because we're telling you practices, but this is really coming from our experiences, not that we are necessarily experts. So first, using the child's preferred pronouns. If a child comes to you and tells you that they identify as something other than what you've always known them as, your first reaction is not going to be, oh, okay. It's not like they just introduce a nickname that they want you to call them from now on. This is a fundamental change, and sometimes this whole future that you imagine for this child is coming crashing down around you, and it's very upsetting. And it's difficult, and there are parents who will absolutely refuse to do that, and caregivers who absolutely refuse to do that. What they may not understand is that even though a child may not have shown much of that tendency before they came out to them, they may have been sitting on those feelings for years, afraid to say anything because they don't want to disappoint their parents or caregivers. They think something's wrong with them, and that maybe they're sick, or if it's a religious household, they may think it's a horrible sin. There could be a lot of reasons why they pretended to go along with what the world expected of them. And when they come out to you, they're trusting you on a very deep level. They're sharing something that they are very rickety about. At first, they're not so sure at all. And when you refuse to acknowledge them, it can really hurt, and it can really knock them off, and it can, in many cases, cause a child eventually to become withdrawn, to become secretive, decide they can't trust their caregivers, and yeah, there's just a dozen different ways that can go bad. That's the point, though, is where you go see a gender identity specialist. You know, if you think about it, it's a bit of a trivial thing to just call somebody by different pronouns, whether they're male, female, or non-binary. People especially trip up on non-binary terms because they think that saying they or them when speaking of somebody in the singular is bad English, although we actually use that in other contexts. So anyway, it takes some getting used to. If on the other hand, a parent or caregiver is willing to use that but slips up once in a while, most trans people will tell you the fact that you're making an effort is enough. You don't have to over apologize or feel terrible about that. Just say, oh, sorry, and move on. If you keep doing that for 5 years, they might start getting upset. But if you're initially just trying to make the effort, I think most trans people will understand and appreciate you doing that. So at that point where someone has come out to the family, they're asking to present as a different gender. If they're near puberty, they might be desperately asking for hormones and surgeries and so forth. You know, if you can get them onto blockers, there's time, you can slow down. They may feel a lot of frustration about that because it's a precarious place to be. It's like you are fighting the whole world. And you may feel that the world is against you. And this is a very dangerous time because without family support, suicide rates are much higher. Lindell, we were just talking about that the other day. Did you have the numbers on that?
No, but I can find them really quickly.
I seem to remember that it drops down to single digits if a trans kid has the support of their family.
Yeah, I actually have it right here. Let me just pull it up real quick here. Oops. Of course, my computer is being slow. Oh, yeah.
While you're looking at that, I will tell you that families sometimes will dig in, and in rare cases, they will never accept a child. Sometimes it takes years and something changes. We've had people in our support group say out of the blue, their family decided to use their pronouns and they don't even know what flipped the switch. But we think love wins in the end. If it's a matter of cutting off all communication with your child, which your child might do once they get older, if you're unwilling to accept them, or have them in your lives in a way that you never expected, love will sometimes overtake that. Go ahead, Adele.
Yes, so the research shows that trans youth whose families are supportive experience a 52% decrease in suicidal thoughts, so half, and 46% decrease in actual suicide attempts. So it can have a profound, just having a supportive family experience can have a profound impact on the students or on the youth's health.
I'll tell you a little bit about my story, and then Charlie, I'd like you to talk about your experience with your family a little bit. So I was abandoned by my mother when I was 6. She sent me over to live with my father, who lived in a car and drank a lot. And it was actually the best part of my childhood. But he had a problem with it too. And he saw me dressed up as a girl once, and he wouldn't talk to me for 3 days. And I was 9 years old. It was pretty devastating. So we just turned it into the secret. I didn't talk about it. He didn't talk about it. And a few years later, he abandoned me. I ended up eventually in a boys' home run by the Mormon Church. And this is where this is what I mentioned earlier, that some of the things that happened there would have gotten them arrested these days. It was run by someone who was his qualifications were that he had worked in a coal mine from the age of 14, had no education, extremely macho. The day I went to this home, they were carrying a kid out on a stretcher because his favorite way of disciplining was to beat the crap out of me. And I was beaten often. He knew I was different. He would tell me, as he's beating me up, that he was going to make a man out of me. It didn't work. So that was the worst period of my life, that 5 years until I got out of the boys' home. I attempted suicide twice. It's really terrible to be in a situation like that. And I know that these days, nothing like that would ever happen, at least not in this country, because they'd be thrown in jail immediately. But back then, kids like me were sort of disposable. Anyway, Charlie, did you want to talk about your experience?
Oh, thanks, Cersei. Yeah, so I had things done to me as a child at 4 and 5 that no child should ever have to endure. And a lot of it was because of this very, very sick uncle who said that he was going to use me so that I would be more like a little girl. So he was going to do things to me to get the little boy out of me. And family now, I have the most supportive sister that I could ever ask for. She supports me in everything. My parents, my father had died before I transitioned. My mother was in her last few years and had some dementia going on, and some days she got it and other days she didn't. And I thought the days that she didn't have it was the very days that she would tell me to just live myself. And I knew she understood what was going on even from her sick bed. And I have family members now who just recently, Cersei knows, I felt like I needed to exit my home very quickly because of some transphobic things that was inspired by some nieces. And, right now I feel like I'm safe. Here I am, this big guy, and I'm talking about, do I feel safe? And that's just, sometimes safe is not physical. Sometimes safe is being emotionally and mentally safe. When the situation happened a couple of months ago with my family, I felt like I was losing my mind. I felt like I felt that night when I laid my head down, I felt like there was just emotionally, there was no safe space for me to be in. And for the first time in almost 10 years, I questioned if I was doing the right thing. And you see, that's the stuff that mental bullshit gets in your head, you allow people to do. And so the only thing I knew to do was I sent an email out to Cersei and Jane and let them know what was going on. And I let my sponsor, who's in AA, know what was going on. And I started talking to people about it. And my recovery tells me that if I keep a secret, if I share that secret, I cut it in half. And so that's what I did. I just started sharing about it and I cut it in half. Do I feel emotionally safe today? Yeah, it took, I even had to start back with my therapist because I know where my mind can go. And I knew where my addiction could take me. And so thank God I had the tools and the steps to know what I need to do to be able to talk this out. But let's think about these kids who have been closed up in homes now with COVID. How safe are they? I'm 61 years old and I was questioning myself a couple of months ago of, did I do the right thing? I definitely did the right thing. It's not a matter of did I do the right thing. It was who I am. and they were questioning who I was. So I'm not trying to throw the race card here, but it is extremely difficult as a person of color to maneuver in Charlottesville, Virginia as a Black trans man. I get it from all sides, because the first thing a person sees is a Black man. And then I have no church, and I'm a very spiritual person, and I would love to have a church, but I have none because my church won't accept me. And so these are the things that, as a trans person of color also, that I have to go through. So thanks for asking, Cersei.
Yep. And Lindell and Charlie, maybe I want to get through these slides. If you want to talk briefly about the principles of safe space, that might be great. This is one of the links in the document that was sent out to you. I thought would be important. These are the Transgender Health Alliance of Central Virginia is a list of providers. Many of them are at UVA. My computer is being slow, but there is a search engine here, despite the blank page, where you can look up the kind of help that is needed. You can do that by location, by profession. So for instance, if you're looking for therapists who are educated in gender issues, you can do that. So close that. There's another organization, there's another link here. I'm not going to open that because my computer is being slow, but this one is a database of references put together by the Virginia Department of Health, and that is headed by Ted Heck, who's been very active in the trans community. So I think I already covered what gender dysphoria is. You are probably familiar with the idea of identity as a spectrum by now. If there is anyone who isn't and would like me to talk about that more, let me know. And I think we kind of covered that already. One of the things that's really important, and you know, we at PFLAG, we try to work with the parents. And as I said before, sometimes they're in a state of shock when they come in. It's important, especially with a younger child, when they tell you what their experiences are, to believe them. If you may desperately want to dismiss it or trivialize it, or hope that it'll go away, or that it's just a phase. That doesn't happen very often. It can, but it doesn't happen very often. And you can really devastate a child if you take that attitude. And parents don't do that out of sense of meanness. They do this because they personally are having a really hard time with it. Parents need support too. So one of the things we do in PFLAG, we separate the meeting halfway through and have parents and allies go in one room and have the trans people go to a different room, just so that they can speak about their difficulties with this without affecting their child. But definitely as a caregiver, if you're still in that beginning stage and still trying to understand what's going on and are upset, it's important to get support.
Cersei, can we dig into that a little bit? You know, if you are an adult in a child's life and you think that the child may, you know, may be trans or may be experiencing gender dysphoria, or you know, may just have something to tell you, how do you do you initiate that conversation? This is a question that came through in the chat. Do you signal that you're open to talking? You know, what would be your thoughts about that?
Any parent or caregiver knows what it's like if they've been with a child long enough, when something is bothering them and they don't want to talk about it. And so it's not a lot different in that case. It's just something much more profound usually than other things they've gone through. So if you notice your child's in distress and you need to sort of coax it out of them, you could start by saying the kinds of things you say in almost any situation, like, it doesn't matter what it is, I still love you, I will always love you. You can tell me anything, and it's really safe to do that. And that's, oh, go ahead. Oh, okay, I thought you were waving your hand.
No, I will, but I'm waiting till you finish. I just wanted to say that.
Okay. So same kinds of ways that you encourage children to speak about what's going on with them. The important thing is when they tell you is to be trustworthy. If you know, they're at a very precarious place and they're wide open, easily hurt. And if you express doubt about what they're telling you, they're going to close down. Their trust in you is going to diminish, and then the communication isn't so good anymore. Go ahead, Linda.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. And I would say that from my own experience with my children, one of the things, the feedback that I got from them, and then also from other youth that I have talked with, is that it's really important to model, not necessarily directly talking to the child. My children, when I asked directly about what they were experiencing, because I had suspicions, they didn't answer me. They didn't tell me. And I don't think it was necessarily because they didn't trust me. It's because they weren't ready themselves, maybe, or they hadn't fully articulated it to themselves. But what they told me later mattered was hearing me be supportive of other people going through the same thing, right? In other words, when they heard me using correct pronouns or even making the statement, you know, gee, I just learned that so-and-so is transitioning, and so now I need to use these pronouns. And so just being very matter of fact and living living to my children my acceptance and my understanding made it easier for them to talk to me about how they were feeling about themselves. So I think even if you don't directly talk to the child, if you take the opportunity to use correct pronouns or to make statements when you're watching television, right? I think that's really important to create that space for the child so that they know already that you're going to be okay. And then the second thing is, I think it's perfectly okay as a parent to say, I don't know what that means. You know, I don't know what it means that you're telling me, but I trust you and I'm sure we're going to get through it and I'm going to learn and I'm going to do whatever I can to support you. You don't have to know everything. And certainly, I certainly don't know anything now, you know, years after beginning to learn about this. I don't know everything. But I think the important thing is to be open about it and saying, I don't know, but what I do know is that I love you and I'm going to support you and I'm going to create as safe a place for you as I can.
Thank you. Okay, one thing I do want to talk about, this will be the last thing tonight, is about transgender children and sexual abuse. These two things can get tangled up, and unfortunately I know of this directly. My stepfather started molesting me when I was 4, and it went on for 2 years. And part of the reason that I went back and forth for a while with transitioning is that I thought that being molested is what made me trans. And I thought that if I could cure myself of that, then I would no longer be trans. And you know, after my teen years and spending 6 years trying to pray it away to no avail, I turned to psychology and worked on the abuse that I had suffered. And that can take a long time to untangle. Most people who have had that kind of thing will tell you that you can get to a place where it no longer runs you, but the scars remain, which is true. There are times something will trigger me and I have to have a good cry, even all these years later. It's just that it isn't weighing on me every day like it did when I was younger. What I found, though, I did get to that place where I felt I was past that. I thought, okay, great. I'm just going to be a man of the world, and notice that the gender dysphoria was still there, strong as ever. So it can, as I'm sure you know, a child that's been molested has a whole range of things going on with them. They think perhaps it was their fault. They can't talk about it. They may have totally blocked it out. I did that for a while, even though the evidence was in plain sight. I somehow didn't connect that was sexual abuse. So if you see how tangled up it can get, thinking that one thing affects the other. Now, there have been some studies about this, and there's some links here that you can look at. But the idea is, many people wondered, well, is it caused by being sexually abused, or are you sexually abused because you're trans? I, at this point in my life, firmly believe it's the second part, because I think predators see a child who is perhaps not acting out in the gender that they were assigned, and think that they are an opportunity. And I think that's what happened to me. The stepfather was a violent predator. I think, he had suppressed feelings of his own, and he took them out by having power over children. And I think the fact that, I was, when he married my mother, I was still dressing as a girl. He just thought that was an invitation, I guess. So there's a lot to untangle there. I would guess a lot of the children you see have been through this. And I think it's important to understand that those are two different aspects. There's not really a lot of evidence that one causes the other. And in fact, the gender identity specialist I went to see about 7 years ago told me that there's no statistical link actually between the two, even though I didn't really question her on that as much as I should have, but anyway, I don't believe that that kind of abuse makes you trans anymore. I have to forgive me. That's a very triggering thing for me to talk about. Does anybody have any questions about that, or anything they'd like to share?
Cersei, I just want to say thank you. I know that you aren't watching the chat, but there's been several people who have just expressed their real gratitude to all of you for sharing so authentically and courageously. And so thank you so much for doing this and for being so open with us. I know it just takes a lot.
It was our honor.
I do want to
go ahead.
I just wanted to say, if folks do have questions, and I know we're shooting for about an hour and we've gone a little bit over, but if anybody wanted to pipe in with a question.
I don't have a question, but I guess I just want to say, like they've all said, just your stories are so powerful. And I've seen, I was a teacher and now I work with teens still, and I see the huge difference that a supportive family and school can make. And so I'm grateful to know the resources that are out there, and really appreciate your stories.
Thank you. That's occasionally someone will come to us, and I was tabling at the Pride event in Lynchburg a week and a half ago, I think it was. And someone came up to us and said they had attended some of our meetings years ago, and what a huge difference it made in their lives. And we hear things like that, and it makes everything worthwhile. Some of the things that we went through, it's too late for us. We had to go through a lot of healing. If we can try to make it better for the next generation coming up, then this is all worthwhile.
Leah is one of our staff members at CASA. So I just have to take a moment to say that she is one of those supports for kids. And so I'm really grateful for Leah, as well as the rest of you. We had a question come through in the chat about whether there were any recommendations for any books or follow-up reading that we might be able to do.
Yes, and I didn't do a good job of listing those. I apologize. I would first of all invite any of you to attend our PFLAG meetings. We have a library so that you can check any of those out. Wow, I'm trying to think of some specifically though. You might want, if you'd like to know more about that case I told you about, the child that they tried to raise as a girl and eventually went back. That was called As Nature Made Him. The man's name was David Reamer. There's one called Gender Outlaws by Kate Bornstein. Pretty good primer on people who are gender divergent. And I'm blanking out on any of the others. I'm sorry. Charlie, Lindell, can you suggest any?
I'm looking right now.
Oh, good. At the end of this document that was sent to you, you see there are some links to some of the major organizations. But this first one, I think you might find particularly helpful, Supporting LGBTQ Youth, a Guide for Foster Parents. First two, actually. And that was put together, that was found by the fourth member of our team who couldn't be with us tonight. The WPATH stands for World Professional Association for Transgender Health. And that's the organization that's considered sort of the gold standard for trans treatment. I'm sorry, go ahead. Is it too soon? Okay. PFLAG, that's our organization. PFLAG used to stand for Parents and Family of Lesbians and Gays, but because they left out transgender people, they just made it into a name and doesn't stand for that anymore. But these days they advocate more for trans people than anyone else. And American Medical Association, who often advocates for ethical treatment of trans people. There's a lot of articles there. One thing I didn't put here, but you might want to know about, Scientific American has written several articles in defense of trans people and talking about different gender identities and so forth. You hear people say, well, you're either born a man or a woman, it's just science. And they've come back and said, no, it's not science. There are a lot of differences there. Mendel, do you have a list for us, or I think she's still looking. So anyway.
I ended up having to go to my bookshelf to find it.
Oh,
There's a book that I'm going to hold it up here so that you can see it. This is actually a pretty good book. I think it's Supporting Transgender and Gender Creative Youth for Schools, Families, and Communities, which is more specific about things that organizations and communities can do. So that might be helpful for you. I'm going to put the title in the chat. And I did notice too that someone had asked a question about this PFLAG provides support for families of children who identify as gay, not trans. And so I just wanted to answer that. We don't actually have a kind of a PFLAG meeting for that at the moment, but I mean, I'm certainly making an offer that if anyone were to contact us, I would be happy to talk with someone. My children both identify as queer. One identifies as genderqueer. So I'm happy to have that conversation. But I don't know, Cersei, I don't know that we've had anyone approach us. In fact, when we first started the PFLAG group 10 years ago, most of the calls that we have gotten have been from parents of gender fluid children or gender nonconforming children. So
there have been a handful of people over the years. So, I mean, PFLAG started out that way in support of lesbians and gays, but no, there just haven't been a whole lot of people seeking support. If there were, we would definitely spin off a separate group for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you do see that support, please let me know or let us know, and we'll do something.
And before we wrap up, Charlie, quickly, I feel like I haven't really spoken enough about trans people of color and the support out there. So if you know of any publications, and maybe you could talk a little bit about the group that you had, could you mention that now, please?
Sure. So you can go to blacktransmen.org. That's our organization. We have some resources for people of color, trans people of color. We have a great group that meets on the second, I believe it's the first and the fourth Wednesday of every month, called Connie. You can see all that information on blacktransmen.org. I also run I have here, it looks like a store in my office here of binders and some other items that we just don't give to just the trans people of color. If you come across someone young trans youth who needs a binder. So a binder is it's like a spandex that one would wear to flatten their breasts so that they be able to get out in public, and that gender dysphoria, to help with gender dysphoria until they're able to get surgeries. So I have those that were donated by both PFLAG, Cersei's Trans Support Group, and as well as Seville Pride. And so I have plenty of those here. If anyone needs one, you can contact me. I believe, Kate, you have my email address to be able to do that.
Yes.
Lastly, I'll kind of toot my own horn. In February of 2022, I will have my own book out called Boy Beneath the Skin. It's by Transgender Publishing. We're working on that book and finishing it up here pretty soon. And so it'll be on Transgender Publishing website, in which you should go look at that website, because Margot Wilson, who owns that Transgender Publishing, has a lot of great books out on all transgender stories of people who have survived through the years.
Charlie, we'll have to have you back to do a book club.
Yeah, I'll be happy to do that.
Or a reading or something for us.
I'll be happy to do that.
Okay, well, I've kept everybody a bit long here, but thank you for attending. Thank you for your questions.
Well, thank you. Sorry, my kids have awoken upstairs. So if you hear peeps, I apologize. But thank you all so very much. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to our speakers, Cersei and Charlie and Lindell. I feel like we could talk for the rest of the night and still learn so much more. But thanks for spending this time with us. I hope that this is just the beginning of a conversation about how we can support the trans youth that we work with, and that we can be in touch. So thank you. Thank you.
And you're all welcome to, if you're, this is an issue that you're dealing with right now, you're welcome to come to our PFLAG meetings. They're on the third Saturday of every month.
Wonderful. All right. Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Cersei, thank you so much.
You're welcome. You're
Really
welcome. Appreciate it.
I hope we can be in touch and continue this partnership, and we'll have to find other ways to work together. I really appreciate your taking the time tonight.
If we ever get past COVID, we've had film screenings in the past, and if we start that up again, I think you might enjoy that. Actually, we could do that. We could do that by Zoom too.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your evening.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, take care.
Bye.